This is a tutorial on how to make a DuBois style fan chart in Adobe Illustrator. It is a tutorial for beginners, so you only need to have a basic understanding of the program in order to follow along, and I will make sure to explain everything that I'm doing as I do it. The only prep work you might want to do is if you'd like to use a custom color palette, you should create that before we begin. And if you don't want to do that, no worries, you can use Adobe Illustrator's default colors. On the left, you can see an example of something I have already made with real modern data. And on the right, what we're going to create together in order to learn how to do this. We're going to start by creating a new file. So go up here to File, New, and you're going to want to put your measurement in inches and create an artboard that is 22 by 28 inches because that was the size of DuBois' poster board. And go ahead and make sure it's in portrait orientation and that you have one artboard. And go ahead and hit create. And now this is our new blank document. First thing I'm going to do is if you have a custom color palette, you can go ahead and import it. So under library, I have mine as user defined. And I'm going to head and drag it in here so I can access it easily. Now I'm going to go to layers. I know I want 2 layers for this project. The first one is going to be the background, so let's create that now. And I'm going to want a second layer that I'm going to call chart, where we create our chart. The purpose of the layers is just to make sure that we don't interfere with our different elements while we're creating. So make sure we're on the background layer. And to create the background, I'm going to come up here to the shapes and make a rectangle that covers the entirety of this artboard. And fill it in with my background color, just like that. And that's all we need to do to create this background. So I'm going to come back to the background layer and lock it. That means nothing in this layer can be changed. And when we go to chart, now everything that we create in this layer is ensured to not mess up our background. We won't accidentally drag that rectangle. To start creating the chart, we're going to want to make a big circle, which is going to be up here under shapes. Make sure you hold down Shift while you drag the circle out to make sure it's in perfect proportion. And you want it so big it pretty much intersects with the side of this piece of paper. You don't need to worry about centering it right now, and mine's just filled in green so that you can see it easily. Now what we want to do is take some bites out of it in order to create that fan shape. So while it's selected, if you come up here to the 3 dots, you're going to get more options. And this here lets you set the angles of the circle. So it's going to start at 35 degrees and end at 145 degrees. And that creates that nice top fan shape. Now, if we select it, we hit Control C, Control V, we get a second shape, and flipping it upside down and dragging this point so it intersects with the other one, we've created our basic fan shape. The idea of what we're going to do next is that we're going to create some lines from the center of the fan to the edge of it in order to create all of the divisions within the fan. But we need to know at what angles we want to set these lines in order to create the percent divisions that we're looking for that actually represents our data. So in order to figure out the angle that we're going to draw these lines at, we need to do a little math on the side. This is a little Excel spreadsheet just to show you the scratch work for how I calculate the boundary angles between each of the sections in this chart. So I've just have some bogus data I'm saying I'm representing where I have categories like 20%, 40%, 30%, 10%, which is these sections right here. And these numbers here are the degrees that the different lines are at. So this boundary right here, we created it to be 35 degrees. And then in order to represent 20% of this top fan, the next line needs to be 57 degrees, and then that section in between is 20%. And I can just do that down the line, and it should always end at 145. That's how you know you've calculated it correctly. If you start at 35 and you get to 145, then you know you're correctly within your boundary angles. And the bottom fan, when you copy it, it ends up being 215. That's this line right here, 215 to 325 right there. And you can do the same thing for both. So the first thing you need to do is create a scaling factor. So I know that that top fan is between 145 and 35 degrees, and I want to put 100% in there, and that gives us degrees per percent. Oops. And now down here, to calculate these numbers, I say, well, I want 20%, and now I'm going to multiply it by my scaling factor to put it into the number of degrees, that would be 20%, and then I'm going to add it to my left boundary on the side, and when I hit enter, then I get the next line that I would need in order to make that 20%. And if you just fill this formula down the line, it will work for the whole thing, and same on the bottom here. So now I can go ahead and take a screenshot of this little chart that I created, and I know that if I create lines in Adobe Illustrator at 57 degrees, 101 degrees, 134 degrees, etc., I will have created boundary lines that correctly divide my fan. So let's go ahead and create these lines. I'm going to first Control V, so I just have my chart for reference up here in the corner. And I have already created a line of the correct length by, once again, I'll show you, dragging from the edge down to the center here, and make sure it says intersect in purple when you hit it. That's how you know you've really actually put the line to the place that you want it to be. And I'm going to go ahead and hit Control C on this line and Control V. And I'm going to need to draw 6 of these lines total. So I'm just going to keep hitting Control V until I have 6 lines total. There we go. And now I'm going to go ahead and make these lines the angles that I want them to be. And I can do that right here with the line selected. So I need the first line at 57 degrees. I need the next line at 101 degrees. And the third line at 134 degrees. And I'm going to go ahead and drag those into place. If I select it and just drag it over, once again, just make sure it says intersect in purple when you've got it in the place you want. Very good. And now let's put the lines on the bottom of the correct angle. I'm going to want that at 223.8. 295.3 and 303. Once again, go ahead and drag these into place and make sure when you do so that it says intersect. Perfect. Now I have created all of the divisions for my fan, and pretty much we just have to color it in. In order to color in the different sections, we're going to use the Live Paint Bucket tool. In order to enable that, first we're going to drag over everything we've created, make sure it's all selected, and hit Group. Good. And then over here, hiding under Shape Builder tool, is the Live Paint Bucket tool. And when I hover over this, it should say Make a Live Paint Group, which is exactly what I want. And now when I go up here to Colors, I can make sure to select into the color palette I want. So let's do purple right here. And when I hover over each section, I should be able to color it in. And you can also actually toggle through the colors with the arrow keys, which is what I'm doing right now. Let's do that, and a nice dark brown. And then in order to do the corresponding data, make sure you do the same color across the way, point to point. Perfect. And now it's colored in. In order to finish this off, we're just going to do some finishing touches. We're going to add titles, we're going to center it. So let's do that together now. So when you have this thing selected, I like to eyeball where it's going to be in terms of up and down. So I just like a little bit of space on the bottom. It doesn't need to be centered, and more space on the top, something like that. And then I go over here to align, and I do this horizontal center align in order to get it right in the center. Now I'm going to create some titles. So I click text tool, drag out a nice text box there, and I'm going to want to do Public Sans font in bold. I'm choosing 50 point, and you're going to want to do it in all caps. I'm just going to say title, and go ahead and make sure you hit this center align in the text box so that when you drag it and center the text box, because Adobe Illustrator will center the text box for you, the text is centered within the text box and the text box is centered. So that means everything lines up exactly how you want. And now let's create a little legend. So to do that, I make a little circle, once again holding Shift. Something about that size looks good. And I'm going to Control C and Control V in order to make 4 of them. And pink lines will help you make sure they're in the same orientation with each other. When you're working with real data and you have long titles, you might have to mess with this to make everything look nice on your page. But something like this is going to look good. And of course, I'm going to select them and fill them in with the appropriate colors. Very nice. Oh, and something I forgot to do before was that I think these legends look best when they have a little line on them. So I'm going to set stroke to black, and whatever the default thinness is, yeah, I think that that looks good. So you can go ahead and do that for all of them. If you had set the stroke to a thin black line before you copy pasted them, it would have done it for all of them, and you wouldn't need to go through and do it manually like I am right now. Okay, very nice. And now I can just create some more text boxes. For the in-chart writing, you're going to want to pick Charter as your font. For the style guide, you can do regular point, and something probably like 25 is going to look good. No, that's much too small. Let's do 40, that looks good. And make sure that once again you're doing it in all caps. So I'm going to call mine Thing 1, centered, centered, and since I have all the settings that I like, oops, pardon that, I just did some misclicks. Since I have all the settings that I like, I'm just going to go ahead and Control C and Control V this text box and move it around to all of the places that I want it, and then I'll edit the text that's in it. Okay, I think that looks very nice. And the last thing I'm going to want to do is create some titles for my different groupings on the top and the bottom of the chart. And you can go ahead and, if you would like, perfectly center align each of these using the align tool instead of eyeballing it, just like that. And that would be a finished chart with real data. I think this would look beautiful and really accurately let people assess the differences between different groups in the same categories.